Hello, SpongeX here. Back when I was a kid, I remembered being excited for a certain TV show called Kirby Right Back at Ya. In the late 1990s and 2000s, video game TV shows were not common, so there was something exciting about seeing characters from video games you grew up loving and seeing them get their own animated adventures. I remember liking Kirby Right Back at Ya, which was honestly the only show I bothered watching on the entire lineup of what at the time was called the Fox Box but later renamed to 4Kids TV. However, I remember one Saturday morning while waiting for Kirby to start, I saw a preview for another TV show based on a video game series, and that was Sonic X. I remembered loving Sonic X as a kid. I remembered being pumped up every time I heard its catchy, yet to some annoying theme song, I guess, but gotta go fast. So I couldn't get enough of this show, and I tried tuning into each new episode as much as I could. I remember there was even a point where, despite how the series ran its course, they stopped showing reruns, and I kept tuning in, going darn it, I wish they'd bring Sonic X back, and eventually they did. But so Sonic X just came out at the right time for me. Around the time before Sonic X premiered to English audiences, owners of both the Nintendo GameCube and Game Boy Advance finally got better exposure to Sonic the Hedgehog, with Sega recently dropping out of the console business and just focusing on making games multi-platform. So Sonic Adventure 2 was the first game to get me into the Sonic series, along with the re-release of Sonic Adventure DX. Before Sonic X, I remember just wanting to see a TV show of Sonic and Friends, but all we really had was the other shows that were produced by DiC, including Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic Saturday AM, and Sonic Underground. Despite how these shows have their fan bases, I remembered renting VHS tapes of all three of these shows after getting into Sonic Adventure 2, and I honestly did not like any of them. I don't know, just something, even at the age of 12, it's I just found these shows very cheesy, out of place, and nothing about them reminded me of the games I grew to love, so yeah, I don't know. So upon hearing about Sonic X, I remember looking up more about it online, and I was interested in seeing how the show would be closer to what I saw in the video games. Here we were seeing characters who had yet to be seen in a TV show adaptation, including Amy, Rouge, Big, and Shadow. So Sonic X seemed to be inspired by the idea of trying to bridge the setting of the Sega Genesis games into the Sonic Adventure game settings, because both were drastically different. Sonic went from going to all these zone-based levels to from the first 5 Genesis era games all the way to getting into a more realistic human-like setting in the Dreamcast games. So it was a pretty exciting time, just playing the video games with their awkward limitations and cutscenes and voice acting, and then seeing it reimagined in a digitally hand-drawn art style. It was just fun being able to point out the similarities and differences between the adventure games and the show's retelling of said events. Same could be said about the Kirby TV show in some aspects. But, so, while I did love Sonic X as a kid, I have to admit the show was not perfect. Even as a kid, there were many episodes or character moments I absolutely hated. The show had some annoying characters, annoying voice acting. The pace was really slow in many episodes. There were many altered moments from the video games that kind of annoyed me with how they were portrayed in the show. So while Sonic X seemed well received and was even 4Kids TV's #1 show with a run of 3 seasons and 78 episodes, I was shocked to find out over the years that Sonic X is a very divisive show for a number of reasons. Many bash the show for replacing the voice actors from the Dreamcast games, which honestly was a plus for me. I mean, I'm not saying that the 4Kids voice actors were great, but I at least thought they did a better job than a lot of the stale acting we got from the Dreamcast games, where it just feels like they're slowly reading off a script without putting any emotion into it. So a very common complaint was the show focused too much on these boring human characters, especially Chris, more on him later. But most importantly, people complained about how poorly butchered the English dub was, and how many unnecessary edits it had compared to the Japanese version. Cutting out a lot of scenes and dialogue, and even rewriting scenes entirely, which heavily declined the quality of certain episodes, took many things out of context and ruined the meaning of a lot of important, crucial moments in the show. So, as a kid, it shocked me to find out all the stuff that 4Kids actually cut out from the English dub, and it honestly angered me. there were a lot of like great images and scenes that I never knew existed because, of course, 4Kids got rid of them. It made me wish we could somehow get an extended English cut of the show. But as the years went by, it was obvious that that was never going to happen. It just doesn't seem like a good business move on Sega or whoever owns the rights to the show nowadays. But on the bright side, people in the United States at least were eventually able to legally watch the English subbed versions of the uncut Japanese episodes. They're still available on Hulu, in fact. You can watch both the Japanese version, uncut, and subbed, and you can even watch the 4Kids English dub version. So it's kind of cool if you want to if you have all the time, actually watch both versions back to back and see what you think, but it still isn't the same as being able to listen to the uncut episodes in your own native language, though. So the main reason I wanted to make this video about Sonic X to begin with was because recently, as of April 2023, Sonic X got a new complete series Blu Ray release that includes all 78 episodes in their uncut Japanese state with English subtitles. And no, this isn't an import, it's an actual North American item. It's made for American audiences, but it brings over the Japanese experience. So all the main menus are in English and stuff like that. The packaging's in English. It's just the episodes themselves are Japanese with English subtitles. So the collection costs about like $60 if I recall, and I managed to buy a copy off Amazon. And overall, it's a decent package, but it's not perfect. On the plus side, you get all the episodes on 2 Blu Ray discs, making this a not so crowded collection. I mean, that really means a lot because I remember like getting the Animaniacs complete series that came on like 17 discs, and that was crazy. So, disc 1 contains the first half of the series, going from the complete first season to the end of the Shadow the Hedgehog saga and the first Chaotix episode. Disc 2 features the rest of Season 2 along with the entirety of Season 3, the Metarex saga. The downside to this being a 2-disc set is that, so they were able to fit all these episodes onto just 2 discs because it is not in an HD format. It's still in, so it hasn't been restored or touched up, so it still has like DVD quality, unfortunately. So it's still a slight improvement over the image quality you would get from watching it on Hulu. I know it's like when watching it on Hulu, it's very pixelated and kind of, I don't know, the outlines don't look as smooth. So it does look a lot better here than it did on Hulu, but it still would have been nice to see it properly restored in HD, have more vibrant colors and cleaner lines, but yeah, it still is cool how they were able to cram so many episodes on a 2-disc without having to badly compress them like they did with, I remember for the SpongeBob First 100 Episodes DVD box set, they did not do a good job at compressing the videos. It had very bad image quality. Honestly, you're better off watching it like on Paramount Plus or Amazon Prime or something. It looks so much better. So, another complaint is that it does not include the English dub episodes either. So, yeah, I know the Japanese version's superior, everyone says, but it still would have been nice to have the English episodes included. It would have been nice to get 2 extra discs that include just the full English dub, especially considering this is a $60 collection. So, it feels like it would have been more worth $60 if it came with the English dub. Disc 2 also contains some bonus features, but nothing to get too excited over. We do get the English and Japanese version of the short animated pitch pilot of Sonic X. Mostly just bits that you've already seen in the actual intro of the show that didn't appear in actual episodes, basically. It all came from the pilot. So the pilot was also uploaded to YouTube years ago, so I think you can even still look it up for free now, so it's not that great of a bonus feature. It also contains a short video showing a few storyboard images of some of the episodes from Season 3. Again, it's nothing special. The storyboards are very small, and they're honestly not very pretty images to look at, so there's much better like storyboards out there for different shows. Sonic X, unfortunately, is not one of the best looking storyboard written shows, so but one fun bonus feature I was not expecting is it does contain the full English opening of Sonic X with optional sing-along options just for fun, and it also includes the theme that was used in the UK version of Sonic X, which in my opinion was the worst opening theme for the whole show. I actually liked both the English and Japanese intros of Sonic X, but I gotta say the UK one's the most boring one out of them all. So overall, this collection is good for those who want to see the uncut version of Sonic X and don't mind having to read throughout to watch a show, because yeah, you're gonna have to read a lot of subtitles for this. You won't be able to understand most anything the characters are saying, except for the few occasions where the characters speak in broken English. But for those who would rather listen to the show to get a full story and don't know Japanese, then this collection might not be for you. I can't recall if there ever was a complete series of Sonic X on Blu Ray. I know there have been DVD volumes of Sonic X back then, before they eventually made a complete series DVD, but that's the thing, it was a complete series DVD. I think this might be the only time it got a complete series on Blu Ray, and it's only for the Japanese dub. So, I can imagine that, for the full set on DVD, it would have been a 12-disc set, considering how some Sonic X DVDs came with 2 discs, and they contained about a total of 13 episodes altogether. It is amazing to see a collection with so many episodes on such a small amount of discs. Back then, Sonic X episodes, when they were first released, they first came out on VHS and DVDs, and they only contained like 4 episodes each. Eventually, they rose up to have about like 6 episodes per DVD, and then eventually they got like their own releases where it just releases half of a season on DVD. I remember I had like the first 2 seasons. Well, I had the first season of Sonic X across like 2 different DVDs. Like one of them was called the New World Saga, and then I can't remember what the second one was, but it's basically the second half of season 1. And I remember getting part 2 of the Metarex Saga, which was the second half of season 2. So season 3, I mean. So yeah, it is cool that we finally live in an era where you can get the full series now on DVD or Blu Ray. So while I do remember loving Sonic X as a kid, I remember over the years just seeing so much backlash for the show all of a sudden. As a kid, it was popular. Growing up, people started saying how much the show sucks, and came to a point where it made me think that maybe the show wasn't as good as I remembered. But after seeing this Blu Ray collection get announced, I thought it would be fun to rewatch the show as it originally aired in Japan and see why fans prefer the Japanese version so much better than the English dub. Overall, yeah, I do agree that Sonic X was a much better show in its Japanese state, but it still feels strange to watch at times, because you're so used to the English version you grew up with, and so it is shocking to see some scenes feeling tonally and drastically different, with like their mixtures of different dialogue, music, and voices, and the 4Kids dub did not use a single bit of music from the Japanese version. It made its own entire soundtrack, basically, and I hear a lot of people say the music in the English version sucked and that the Japanese version was superior, and I honestly feel mixed about this. I think both had their pluses and minuses. The 4Kids dub was a mixed bag when it came to music. Sometimes the music fit the scenes well, other times it sounded too loud and very out of place. Like everyone's always joked about how like every time Rouge the Bat shows up they'd have like the blaring saxophone music playing, and yeah, that got kind of distracting, but I do think the 4Kids dub had better music variety, though, and it knew how to switch the tone of certain scenes with the change of different music. Honestly, there were a lot of scenes in the English version that I thought fit better because of the music choices, where the Japanese dub seems to recycle the same music more often. It's like they have like the same music that plays every time a scene with Eggman comes up. It's a very... You know, it's like in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Every time Eggman showed up, you had like that wah 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 kind of music playing, and that's what it kind of reminded me of with Eggman. It's like he had the same thing that kept playing every time he came up, and so it got kind of annoying how every time he showed up, you heard the same music looping over and over. It got kind of tiring after a while. Yeah, so arguably the 4Kids version had louder music, while the Japanese dub used more quieter synthetic music. And so some of it was okay, but a lot of the times I felt the music did not fit the scenes very well. For instance, in certain scenes in the 4Kids dub, when Amy would pull her hammer out and attack something, they'd use suspenseful, loud action music, where the Japanese dub played really childish, sprinkly sounding music. It just sounded like a downgrade compared to 4Kids. So there are even times where there's no music playing at all in the Japanese version, which made some scenes feel emptier and even more boring than they should have. I think like one case where it did work was like the few final episodes of season 3. Like that was a real dramatic and heartbreaking set of episodes. Like Sonic and Pals are basically about to meet their match, and a lot of tragic stuff happens, and that's where I think like the lack of music actually helped there. But a lot of other times I'm comparing to like how I think the 4Kids dub was more eerie or suspenseful because it actually had music during that part. And one episode in particular is another episode from season 3 where I'll talk more about this one later, but there's basically an episode where Shadow is trying to murder someone. And in the Japanese version, there's no music, which just makes a lot of the scenes feel kind of awkward. In the 4Kids dub, the music gets loud, suspenseful, like a horror movie, making Shadow's presence more intimidating. And so, honestly, I feel like a lot of the music from the Japanese version feels more suitable for a quirky high school anime, not necessarily a show about Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know, I just didn't feel like the music fit the Sonic the Hedgehog brand very well compared to the 4Kids version, but... So yeah, overall I feel very mixed about the music. Both have their pluses and minuses. I do kind of prefer the 4Kids dub's music overall. It's not great, but I feel like it did mix better with the visuals and stories compared to the way the Japanese version kept just reusing the same music loops over and over. No good transitions from one scene to another. So one thing the Japanese version does have over the 4Kids dub is it does have music from the actual video games, mainly the adventure games. It wasn't used a whole lot, but like the final episode, the Shadow the Hedgehog arc actually does use Sonic Adventure 2's theme, Live and Learn. While it was neat to hear that song in the show, I felt like it was placed in the wrong spot of the show. It played right as Shadow sacrificed himself to save the world. So like in the original game, this part had more epic music, followed by sad music as we're forced to watch Shadow die on screen, basically. So in the Japanese version of Sonic X, instead, you got like the rock and roll music of Live and Learn playing in the background as Shadow was dying. It made no sense, honestly. It was badly placed into the episode. The final scene of Season 2 even plays the sad music that we heard from the credits of Sonic Adventure 2. And Season 3 has sprinkles of other music from Sonic Adventure 2, including Radical Highway's music during one of the action scenes. There were even 2 episodes that featured the music from Sonic Adventure's Twinkle Park, mainly the eerie music that appeared in Amy's version of the level when she's in the mirror house. So it was really neat to see actual game music used in the show. Honestly, I would have preferred if the show just consisted mostly of just music from the adventure games. I think it would have made the show more entertaining overall. So every time the Sonic Adventure music came on, that was a pretty cool treat, but I just wish there was more of that. Barely used in Season 2, but used a little more in Season 3, but not a whole lot regardless. I also got to give credit to the Japanese version for the three of the 4 vocal themes of the show. The opening theme, called Sonic Overdrive, is really catchy and energetic, despite barely a word from the song being understandable in my language, but the other vocal themes are from the show's end credits, which there are 3 variants of. So, the show's end credit sequences were exclusive to the Japanese version, unfortunately, which is quite a shame, honestly. For these have some gorgeous imagery and music, and it's a shame that, if you just relied your whole life on just watching the English stuff, you wouldn't have known these scenes existed. The first variant plays during the first half of Season 1, where we see Sonic staying up late at night and watching TV in Chris's living room, only to get scolded the morning after by Ella, as she points to a sign that reads, not to watch TV if the light's off, and not to sit too close to the TV, and Sonic just kind of, jerkishly, smiles, heh. So, the second half of Season 1 got another end credit variant, which became the show's main end credits for the rest of the series, majority of it at least. Everything except for the second half of Season 2 mainly, but then they went back to it with Season 3, and this is arguably the best end credit scene, as it has a beautiful song playing in the background, while we see a gorgeous shot of Sonic sitting on a skyscraper roof during sunrise, and it cuts to a dramatic shot of Sonic walking through a foggy street, only to stop in front of Amy, who was standing next to a tree, and I don't know why, but I kind of teared up when I first saw that. It was, it just made me kind of sad that this was never shown the 4Kids dub. It helps that as a kid, I was a huge Son Amy fan, so yeah, take that as it is. The third credit variant happened during the second half of Season 2, so basically after the Shadow Saga and the Chaotix episode. So the third credit variant had more of a Japanese rap playing in the background, and we got some really stylized animations of silhouettes of Sonic the Hedgehog running, and it was, in my opinion, the second best of the end credit scenes. I am glad they went back to the Sonic and Amy end credit sequence for the rest of Season 3. Most of Season 3, at least. There were a few episodes where they had kind of like the episode play into the credits, so they didn't have time to play the regular credit scene. But the song that played during the second variant is probably the most important song of the whole show. Its music can be heard throughout many important scenes from the show's season finales, especially Season 2's finale. So, the Japanese version definitely has better sound effects, making a lot of the action scenes more exciting with the use of realistic gunfire and explosions. The 4Kids version censored a lot of the gun sounds with very cartoony laser sound effects, which really downplay a lot of the show's more serious moments and action scenes. While I don't understand Japanese, I can at least say the voice actors in the Japanese dub did a good job for the most part. I might prefer the 4Kids voices, mainly because I could actually understand what they were saying, but many characters were less annoying in the Japanese version, I gotta admit, especially Cream, Vanilla, Gamma, Froggy, and Eggman's robots. I did find a few characters in the Japanese version rather annoying, mainly Amy and Tails. If people thought Tails sounded like a girl in the English version, oh, he sounded more like a girl in the Japanese version, but I prefer their less higher-pitched voices from the English dub compared to their higher-pitched Japanese voices, I guess, but I thought the Metarex actually sounded cooler in the 4Kids dub, where they had these robotic, distorted voices. I thought it made them sound more intimidating. So, one problem I did have with the Japanese dub was that some of the voices just didn't seem to fit the characters' designs well, mainly for a lot of the human characters. Chris's Uncle Sam sounded way too deep. I don't know, I kind of preferred the 4Kids version of his voice, despite the fact how I hate that character regardless, but there are times where it's hard to tell if characters were being sarcastic or serious in the Japanese version, because they don't seem to put much emotion into their regular voice lines, but however, when it comes to the scenes where the characters break down into tears, it is definitely more heartbreaking in the Japanese versions. In the 4Kids dubs, the characters crying sounded very fake, like the actors are just phoning it in, especially whenever it's a scene with like Amy or Cream crying. But in the Japanese version, anytime the characters are crying, they sound like they witnessed bloody murder with their crying. Like, it sounds like they're screaming in pain. It's like they're having trouble breathing, and the scene where Cream had to defeat Emerald really tore me up after watching the Japanese version. I thought it was sad in the English version, but oh my god, it was even sadder in the Japanese version. It really made you feel the trauma that Cream actually went through. Not to mention the tragic thing that Tails had to do during the last few episodes of Season 3, which was heavily butchered in the 4Kids dub, unfortunately. I'll get to that later. But so again, the voice acting is a bit of a mixed bag. I think overall the 4Kids voice dub was funnier, although maybe for a lot of the wrong reasons, but as for the dramatic scenes, the Japanese voice cast is superior. As for the writing, it's also a mixed bag. Overall, I think the Japanese version definitely has more poetic and thought-provoking dialogue. There are a lot of episodes that were written so much better than how they were in 4Kids, but it's not perfect. There are many scenes where characters get upset and all they can do is just shout the word baka over and over, which basically translates to either jerk or idiot, depending on how it was used. The 4Kids version had a lot of funnier lines of dialogue, in my opinion. It had a lot of funnier jokes, too, but when it came to censorship or trying to reword certain words for a different region, the writing felt very hard. The 4Kids version had a lot of lines of dialogue that ignore important story elements or take a lot of important things out of context, and there were a few scenes in the 4Kids version that I felt were better than the Japanese version, but not a whole lot per se. The Japanese version has a lot of fourth wall breaking jokes, which took me out of the experience a lot of the times. And I think there was only like one fourth wall joke that was kept in the English dub, and that was a joke on Eggman taking over the series and calling it Eggman X, and that one was okay. It was kind of funny, but a lot of the fourth wall jokes were consisted of either by Eggman or the Team Chaotix, but even Amy and Knuckles had at least like one moment where they broke the fourth wall, and so I honestly prefer the English version in how they rewrote like some of the fourth wall breaks, and or like how they omitted them entirely, and what they came up with instead I found a lot more funnier or entertaining. Like during the cruise episode, there's a part where Amy tries getting Sonic to shape up so he doesn't set a bad example for the people who look up to him. Now, that's how it played in the English dub, but in the Japanese version, she flat out breaks the fourth wall and points out how badly things would go for them if Sonic keeps us up, because he's the star of the show after all, and she starts going on about how it will ruin their merchandise sales, and that felt very out of place. It made me go like, yeah, I actually prefer the way the English audience handled that one better. But so The only fourth wall joke I kind of liked from the Japanese version was the one where the Chaotix steal a DVD player to watch the events of the show they're starring in order to get caught up on what happened before they arrived. And it's a totally stupid but really funny scene. A funny episode for that matter. I'll get more on that one later. But it's a shame that, come to think of it, a lot of the cut content from the show were mostly scenes consisting of the Chaotix. It wasn't just like a few short seconds. They were like entire scenes that lasted minutes. And it's a shame a lot of them were cut because a lot of them were actually really fun sequences. The Japanese version has a lot less restrictions despite how it was still aimed to be a show for children. And it even has some vulgar or risque moments. There's one use of the word shit in episode 2, and Sonic said it right in front of innocent little Cream the Rabbit, out of all characters. And as far as I know, that was like the only really vulgar word used in it. The rest of the foul language in the show is very PG language, like damn, hell, and pissed off. There are more risque moments in the show that are completely rewritten out of context in the Japanese version, like there was one scene where Rouge teases Knuckles about moving in with him, and she even flat out asks him how he is at night, causing Knuckles to blush in embarrassment. Or like in the episode where Sonic can't stop running at the beginning, there's a part where Eggman's giant chicken robot kidnaps Amy, and in the 4Kids dub, we see how the robot tears a bit of her dress as it's holding her by her dress, and so she blushes and then shouts, "Hey, that's a brand new dress, buddy," but in the Japanese version, she shouts, "Hey, what are you trying to do, pervert?" So, to be honest, they never really made it clear if she was being held by her dress or her underwear, so I don't know, but either way, it was definitely a lot naughtier in the Japanese version, judging by, like, Amy's response. Yeah, another example is in a Season 3 episode called Eggman Joins the War. So, basically, Sonic and pals were being thrown up and down the air on a trampoline net, and so in the 4Kids dub, there's a random moment where Amy leans over and asks Cream if her boots make her legs look skinny. And you see in the background, she's just like looking up her dress and blushing. Yeah, that made no sense in the English dub, and so in the Japanese version, she flat out says, "My butt hurts, is it bruised?" Which Cream assures her it looks fine, and then we see Cheese blushing, so it made more sense in the Japanese version. Still very naughty humor, especially for a kid's show, but, yeah, I just knew, like, even as a kid, I saw that scene, I thought this looked really weird. So, you learn how it went in the Japanese version, it's like, okay, that makes more sense, so. And then, of course, the one risque scene that I see a lot of people talk about that was exclusive to the Japanese version is where Knuckles is chasing Eggman's robots, and he ends up chasing him through a brothel. Knuckles blushes, runs out of the building, and shouts, "What am I feeling?" And I'm not gonna lie, that cracked me up. Because I always heard about this scene, but I never learned about how Knuckles' response was. So, just like seeing him shout, "What am I feeling?" That was hilarious. I got a good laugh out of that. The English version also cut out many references to alcohol, digitally removing them or replacing them with orange juice. There was even an entire segment cut out where Vector was doing an impression of a detective and was even holding a cigar for laughs, and so that scene was completely absent in the 4Kids version. However, I think many can agree the dumbest things that 4Kids cut out were the signs with English language written on it. It comes across that 4Kids wanted to remove it to make it more accessible when airing the show on other regions, but despite being a Japanese anime, many of these scenes had English words to begin with, and they were not badly translated. They showed up on things like character IDs, the names on a character's house or something, the names on buildings, advertisements, posters. It's like it all translated perfectly fine into the English language with no, no bad translations whatsoever. So 4Kids edited them out and didn't bother leaving them for the English version. And they replaced them with blank, awkward signs. It's like, what the heck were they thinking? While I do like some of the jokes from the English dub, I gotta agree, though, overall, the Japanese version is superior when it comes to getting the show's fullest experience, as there are plenty of memorable moments and imagery that you would be missing out on if you just relied on the English dub alone. I remember learning about a lot of these back then, because I was so confused, because I remember, like, back then there were websites where they had, like, all these pictures from the show, and I remember seeing a lot of imagery where, when looking back on the show on my DVDs, I'm like, how come this image didn't show up? And then I learned later, oh, that was exclusive to the Japanese version. So, before I get into the show's plot and episodes, let's discuss the show's animation. If there's one thing that many people can agree on, whether they like Sonic X or not, Many claim that the show's art style is good overall. It's heavily inspired by the artwork of the Sonic Adventure games, marking the first time modern Sonic was introduced into a hand-drawn animated form. This was the second and last Sonic cartoon to be animated digitally, because I think Sonic Underground was actually the first digitally drawn cartoon. It definitely had more vibrant colors and cleaner lines compared to the earlier DiC shows, but the animation definitely has some issues though, but basically every show had these kind of problems back then, and so there were moments where the characters looked wonky or off-model. Sometimes their size proportions might have been a little different, or there might have been a few miscolored moments. But it's nowhere near as bad as the animation errors you saw from the first 3 DiC Sonic cartoons. So many have pointed out that Sonic and Shadow's quill counts look very off in a lot of scenes. They're like Sonic is supposed to have 6 quills on the back of his head altogether, but Sonic X reduced it to only 3. And so it doesn't look so bad when you see him from the front or side, but many shots where it shows him from behind, it really looks weird. Many point out it makes him look more like Metal Sonic, but... So, aside from the animation errors, the animation is overall gorgeous, mostly relying on beautifully hand-drawn characters with lush, vibrant environments, a lot of colors, and the show also implemented a few CG effects during a few scenes. Not a whole lot, although Season 3 starts heavily using them more. For a lot of the outer space scenes, like with the ships they're flying around, stuff like that. And so, CG mostly seemed to be used for a few mechanical vehicles, sonic spin effect, water effects, and lighting effects, but most of the animation seems to be digitally drawn and colored. The CGI does look a bit dated nowadays, but it's nowhere near as bad as a lot of other shows from the early 90s, so, like, it's not the worst, but it definitely has aged a bit. The animation was done by the legendary anime studio TMS, who was responsible for animating a number of beloved cartoons from the 80s and 90s, and as far as I know, they're still making anime to this day, just not quite like the ones they made for other studios back then. So, a lot of these shows that they made for other studios include Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Batman the Animated Series, and Season 1 episodes of various Disney cartoons, including DuckTales, Adventures of Gummy Bears, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. And strangely enough, even the movies Little Nemo and Slumberland and Akira, it's like, those movies have, like, really high budgets, and it's shocking to make you realize, like, TMS did that. The people who made Animaniacs and Sonic X, they're the ones who animated those films. That's crazy. So, I remember as a kid, something about Sonic X reminded me a lot of the artwork of Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. Something about, like, the backgrounds, the colors, and some of the facial expressions the characters made. It was fun to learn many years later that, yep, that's why. It was done by the same company. I've even seen people who hate Sonic X who can't deny, though, that they like the art style. They just wish there was a better show to go with it. People still like to make mock-up drawings showing what other Sonic games would have looked like if it got the Sonic X treatment, and I remember as a kid hoping Sonic X would return with more episodes retelling events from the more recent Sonic games at the time, like Sonic Rush, Sonic Riders, Sonic 06, or Sonic and the Secret Rings. My younger self was so disappointed, it never happened. So yeah, I remember loving the show's art style, and to this day I still do. It's just got great color choices, it's got some occasional funny facial expressions, and one thing I absolutely love about the show is the lighting and shading. I remember being stunned when watching a lot of these episodes for the first time, and even to this day I still find it amazing, especially considering this was a show from like 2003. So, the animation can range from being good to cheap, depending on the scene. By that, I mean, like, the character animation. Sometimes it can be stiff, sometimes it can be a little more fluid, but for the most part, it is pretty cheap animation, but not god-awful, per se. Yeah, but, like, one thing I loved about the show was the lighting. Like, I still, like, love, like, the imagery of, like, the first episode when Sonic gets dropped into the human world, and you see, like, all these bright lights shining on him. Through like a night city setting, and it's just real beautiful imagery. And so overall the animation art is great, but it has a few downsides. Sometimes there are some derpy character facial expressions, but it's still an improvement over past shows and still one of the best looking Sonic shows to this day. I just wish the human characters looked a lot better, because there's something about like their eyeballs, they just look so buggy and lifeless, especially the kid characters like Chris or Molly. I don't know, there's something about their eyes that kind of bugged me. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the seasons and stories of the show itself. The first season is what is dubbed as the New World Saga of the show, in which Sonic the Hedgehog, his friends, and archenemy Dr. Eggman are sent from their worlds and end up in the human world. Basically the plot of any live-action adaptation of a beloved children's cartoon, mainly ones that star cartoony animals. So the characters don't end up in New York per se, like all those other generic plots, but they might as well have, since Station Square, which was the setting of Sonic Adventure, was heavily inspired by New York, and that's what the setting is in this, it's Station Square. So, as a kid, this show's plot was kinda cool. It tried giving an explanation for how and why Sonic was running around a human world all of a sudden in the Sonic Adventure games, but, so Season 1 serves as a prequel to the Adventure games, where Season 2 retells the events of Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, while also throwing in references to some of the other recently released Sonic games, including Sonic Heroes and Sonic Battle. So Episode 1 of Season 1 shows Sonic trying to rescue his friend Cream the Rabbit and Cheese the Chow from the evil Dr. Eggman, who collected the 7 Chaos Emeralds. So if you played the video games, you know like these are real powerful MacGuffins, and the show even explains it later on. But so he's going to use them for some world domination scheme. Sonic recklessly attacks Eggman's machine holding the Chaos Emeralds, causing a time and space explosion called Chaos Control to occur. So Sonic, his friends, along with Eggman, get sucked into the Chaos Control and get dumped into an alternate dimension, which is basically the human world. So the first episode features Sonic getting chased by police who are disturbed by his appearance and more disturbed by his incredible speed. So eventually Sonic gets chased by some race car driver / officer named Sam, who later becomes a reoccurring human rival for Sonic, because both were obsessed with being fast and racing, basically. So Sam is obsessed with keeping the title of being the fastest thing on the streets and can't stand the thought of a blue hedgehog being faster than him. And so, honestly, I don't care for Sam as a character. I think he is honestly the weakest part of this episode. The scenes with him really drag on. I remember they bored me as a kid, and they still bore me to this day. So, the rest of the whole episode is mostly great, but Sam's scenes are incredibly long and boring. I did enjoy Sonic messing with Sam's crew, though. Sitting on top of their vehicles and messing with them. That was fun. But so after Sonic manages to outrun Sam, he ends up crashing into the pool of a mansion. Sonic nearly drowns until a kid jumps in and saves him. The kid introduces himself as Chris Thorndike, and Sonic introduces himself. So, starting off, Chris didn't seem like such a bad character, but as the series went on, many fans went on to agree that Chris is the worst part of this show. He is just such a boring and whiny character. He is way too obsessed with Sonic that he makes Amy Rose look sane in comparison. Chris is supposed to be an audience insert, or surrogate, so basically making kids imagine how cool their life would be if they were in Chris's situation. Saving like someone who's as cool and heroic as Sonic the Hedgehog and getting dragged into Sonic's heroic adventures. So, but all it did was it left people imagining a better show where it does all that without characters like Chris getting in the way, and along with Chris's friends and the other human characters that just drag the show on. We came here to watch Sonic the Hedgehog and his friends fight the evil Dr. Eggman, not watch a kid go on about his struggles with his parents and all that. And so, a lot of these episodes just felt wasted on these human characters that no one asked for. I'll even say the live-action Sonic the Hedgehog movies actually did a much better job at, giving less screen time to the humans and keeping the focus on Sonic and friends. And that was great. It felt like Sonic X done right. So it gets to, all these human characters get so disruptive, it comes to a point where you nearly forget that you're watching a show of Sonic the Hedgehog to begin with. That's just how bad a lot of these scenes get. They just go on about army politics or a kid having mommy and daddy issues, and in small doses, some of these human characters are tolerable and sometimes can get some funny comic relief, but when we waste 22 minutes consecutively on these characters in many episodes in a row, it's enough to make you shout, "Get back to the colorful talking animals already!" So, Chris is just a badly written character. The whole show is trying to make fans empathize with Chris, because he grew attached to Sonic the Hedgehog being his friend, and over the course of the show, he can't imagine his life without Sonic. So he acts like his life would be miserable without Sonic, despite how he's a very popular kid. He's a rich kid with famous parents who are barely around, but it's shown many times that despite their absence, they still love him very much, and they try spending as much time with him as they can when their jobs don't require it. So Chris is surrounded by friends and family who absolutely adore him. including his inventor Grandpa Chuck, a butler named Mr. Tanaka who would gladly die to protect Chris and his family, and a maid named Ella who always looks out for him and cooks him meals and stuff like that. And so Chris has like 3 friends at school who care a lot about him greatly, and yet Chris comes across as such an ungrateful brat to all of his friends and family. He acts like he doesn't care about them. All he cares about is Sonic. Even with Sonic's friends himself, it's like he acts like they don't matter. Only Sonic matters. And so despite being the main character, Sonic is constantly portrayed as like the coolest person ever. But honestly, Sonic is a lazy jerk in this show. Sonic does have a strong sense of justice and is willing to help anyone in desperate need, but he constantly leaves his friends behind without giving a word. Sometimes even Chris gets annoyed with Sonic, but somehow Chris just finds this jerk hedgehog to be like the greatest thing ever. I mean, I could argue like characters like Tails and Amy were better friends to him, and although they have their flaws too, but it doesn't make sense why Chris is more into Sonic only. And you could say that's a problem with a lot of the Sonic the Hedgehog games. They try acting like Sonic's the most important character when a lot of fans are saying, what's so great about him? We like these characters more. And Sega just has this agenda where Sonic has to be the most important, and fans are kind of getting sick of it. So Chris is just a frustrating character who got too much screen time that was better left for more interesting characters from the video games, like Tails, Knuckles, Amy, etc. So most of Chris's scenes consist of him whining, wondering where Sonic is, and screaming Sonic's name out in the open, and throwing pity parties over how much his life sucks without Sonic. And Chris just, I don't know. Well, not everyone does hate Chris, though. Like, I actually do see there are fans, like, on Twitter who ask, like, why do so many people hate Chris? So Chris actually does have some fans who empathize with him or relate to him, but so I'm not saying that everyone does in fact hate him, but it is a very common complaint. Most people seem to hate on Chris, and it's not hard to understand when you've actually watched the show. And many can argue the show would have been so much better off without Chris and his supporting cast of characters. Should have just focused on Sonic and the others. Occasionally interacting with a few human characters to get the plot going, but we didn't need them as main characters. I also think the show really suffers from pacing issues, as if the human characters weren't already scene hogs that drag the show on. It doesn't help that the show relies way too much on flashbacks and recaps of previous episodes. It's like, I thought they were bad in the English dub, but they're honestly worse in the Japanese version. The English versions actually bothered trying to trim some of these flashback moments or recaps. So like usually the beginning of a lot of English episodes would have like a narrator recapping what happened last time, and in the Japanese version the narration's completely absent. Instead it bothers showing like the last 2 and 3 minutes of the previous episode, despite how you just watched it, you know. And so yeah, I don't know. The show has way too many flashbacks that just drag on the screen time. How many times do they have to keep reminding us that Chris saved Sonic the Hedgehog from a pool? It's one thing to bring it up, but no, they have to show the whole scene all over again. It happens like probably over 6 times in the show. And so, how many times do we have to be reminded that people think Shadow looks like Sonic, or how many times do we have to get a flashback to when Shadow sacrificed himself to save humanity? And now, I know Sonic Prime has a lot of flashbacks, but honestly, it's done right, because, you know, it's a show that was given to us bit by bit, so every time they show a flashback, it's of scenes we haven't seen yet, and it adds to the story, it keeps it going, instead of constantly reminding us of the episodes we've already seen. So episode 2 introduces Chris's grandpa Chuck, who kind of reminds me of the professor from, you know, Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And so he ends up finding out about Sonic and how Chris is hiding him in their house, despite how the police are on the lookout for Sonic's capture. Sonic sees a TV report showing his friends Cream the Rabbit and Cheese the Chow being held captive at a government facility, Area 59. With Chuck's help, Sonic ends up breaking into Area 59, rescuing Cream and Cheese and reuniting with his best friend Tails the Fox, who gives him a ride back with his plane, the Tornado. As Sonic, Cream, Cheese, and Tails meet back up with Chris and Chuck at Chris's mansion, Tails begins to realize that if they're all here, then maybe Knuckles and Amy are there too, and unfortunately, so might Dr. Eggman. And so, as we see, Dr. Eggman basically plotting to take over this new world he's in. So overall, episode 2 was pretty decent. It was a pretty entertaining, action-packed, stealth-filled episode. And Episode 3 has Eggman trying to take over the human world with a giant missile-armed robot. We are introduced to Sonic's rival, Knuckles the Echidna, who is angry at Sonic and blames him for their whole predicament of being trapped inside a different realm. Knuckles just wants to get back home and go back to protecting what was called the Master Emerald, something that a giant gem that he's basically been entrusted to watch over for as long as he can remember. Accompanying Knuckles is Amy Rose, a pink girl hedgehog who is madly in love with Sonic, and we just see how she's getting tired of Knuckles talking bad about Sonic and blaming him for everything. And so, eventually Tails tries to take down Eggman with his plane. Amy decides to try helping Tails out with her giant hammer, only to be held hostage by Eggman. So Knuckles tries saving her, but before that can happen, Sonic comes in to save the day. As Sonic, Amy, and Knuckles get cornered by armed agents, Tails flies in with an escape ladder on his airplane and rescues Sonic and Amy and Knuckles. So Amy decides to stay with Sonic and the gang at Chris's house, but Knuckles drops off the ladder and decides to do things on his own. Episode 4 was nothing special, just a long excuse to introduce the Chaos Emeralds, like how basically Chris ends up fighting Eggman over the first Chaos Emerald that was finally found, and so throughout the series we'll see the characters constantly searching for the 7 Chaos Emeralds, sometimes even stealing it from one another, and so for Season 1's sake, basically they want to get the 7 Chaos Emeralds to return Sonic and Pals back to their own world, trying to make Chaos Control happen again. So this episode introduced a character named Mr. Stewart, who is a government agent who was ordered to blend in as a school teacher in order to spy on Chris, who is a #1 suspect in possibly holding the whereabouts of Sonic and his friends. Episode 5 seems to be a fan favorite episode, as it's the first episode where we get an action-packed fight scene between Sonic and Knuckles, basically a trademark that happened in previous Sonic games, including Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Adventure. So the episode did have some funny moments, especially when Tails and Amy have to pretend to be plush animals in order to blend into the human world, leading to a point where Amy gets her ear pulled by a little girl, causing Amy to kick the girl and then go back to pretending to be a doll. It's a laugh-out-loud funny moment, and the fight between Sonic and Knuckles was very entertaining. It marks the first of many times Knuckles gets tricked by Dr. Eggman in the series, which is a staple carried over from the video games as well. Eggman tricks Knuckles into thinking Sonic trapped them into the human world intentionally and doesn't want to leave unless he says so. So, meanwhile, Eggman manages to capture and trap Tails, Chris, and Amy and is holding them hostage. And so Sonic has to try to save them while also fighting off Knuckles and talk some sense into him, basically. And so, eventually, Knuckles realizes he was tricked and he finishes off Eggman, causing Knuckles to then journey off on his own, but gain a little more respect for Sonic in the process. So, this also marked the first appearance of Chris's maid, Ella, his butler, Mr. Tanaka, and we are also introduced to Bo-kun, Eggman's little messenger robot who constantly leaves explosive TV messages. A lot of the early Season 1 episodes are very simple and contain many misadventures of the characters, while also trying to evade the government, until Sonic manages to defeat Eggman in a 2-part event, causing the government to praise Sonic and Pals as heroes and pardoning them of their arrests and making them honorary citizens of Station Square. So while there are plenty of filler episodes where nothing much happens, there are still plenty of cute and funny stories to tell and very many iconic moments. So Episode 6 involves Cream the Rabbit missing her mom and getting lonely, having to constantly hide from everyone. So Chris finds out his mom is coming back home to spend time with him. So Chris's parents are very famous people in here. Like, Chris's dad is like a famous company owner. I can't remember like what he did. He owns like some kind of big office building, and so his mom is a famous movie star. And so Chris's mom decides to hold a party, but hijinks ensue as Cream the Rabbit wants to help Chris out with the party, while Chris is constantly trying to keep her hidden from everyone. It is revealed that Mr. Tanaka already knows about Sonic and Pals. He's just that good of a butler, I guess, but Chris still doesn't want Ella to know about it. So meanwhile, Sonic is rushing off to find some special flowers to cheer Cream up. It doesn't help that Chris's teacher, Mr. Stewart, is also coming over because he wants to meet Chris's mom, as he's a really big fan of her work. But most importantly, he wants to secretly spy on them and find out more about Sonic and Pals. So it turns out Sam, the race car driver, is Chris's uncle as well. And he happens to come to the party and start sharing his story on how he was outdriven by a blue hedgehog the other night. Meanwhile, Sonic messes with Sam by teasing him through the windows and hiding every time Sam points to him and yells. So a lot of funny stuff happens in this episode, and Eventually, Chris's mom was called to be needed back at the studio, and so she's forced to leave the party, and she doesn't have enough time to tell Chris. So it leaves Chris to feel very bummed out, and causing him to kind of talk bad about his mom. Eventually, Cream hears, so Cream was actually able to overhear Chris's mom leaving, and she saw how sad she felt for having to leave, and so it made Cream feel very sad. And so when Cream hears Chris like talking bad about his mom, it causes Cream to get mad at him and shame him for talking so badly about his mom. Obviously, Cream is holding feelings for, wanting to actually see her own mom, but knowing she can't. So it gets her upset to see that Chris is talking bad about his own mom when he should be thankful that he even has a mom to see for the time being. And so Ella happens to witness this and faints as she sees Amy and Tails chasing after Cream, trying to comfort her. And so in the end, Chris ends up doing the right thing and ends up telling the truth to Ella about Sonic and pals. And we later see Ella warming up to Cream as she helps Ella out in the kitchen. And Chris still feels bummed out for hurting Cream's feelings earlier. So Cream comes in and gives Chris a crown made of the flowers that Sonic gifted to her. So overall, this is a very cute and hilarious episode. One of my favorite episodes of Season 1 is the episode where the gang are going to a beach, and Sonic refuses to go due to his fear of water. Despite being angry with Sonic, Amy can't help but imagine how great and romantic things would have been if Sonic came to the beach with her, and so Amy eventually finds a couple on a beach. The girl gives her boyfriend a good luck bracelet made of seashells, claiming that it will help make him a better swimmer. Amy can't help but want to make one herself to give to Sonic. So eventually Eggman attacks the beach resort. Sonic eventually shows up to stop Eggman, but gets grabbed by Eggman's octopus robot. Amy ends up heroically jumping out of Tails' plane and basically finishes off the robot with her hammer, freeing Sonic in the process. And Sonic thanks Amy for doing that. Before Sonic can go, Amy stops Sonic and pulls out a bracelet she made, and Sonic stands there kind of speechless, and he seems really flattered that she went through the trouble of making that for him. And we actually see him reaching to put it on, but right as he does it, Eggman comes back with a giant centipede robot, and it smashes Amy's bracelet. Amy breaks down onto the ground in tears over seeing her gift that she worked so hard on for Sonic being destroyed. As she holds the pieces into her fists, she gets angry and pulls out her hammer, angrily destroying Eggman's robot piece by piece, causing her to launch herself and Eggman deep into the ocean in the process. Sonic shouts in shock as he sees Amy, make like a big splash into the ocean, possibly drowning, and so he even goes in after her despite how everyone knows he can't swim. So as Amy blacks out from drowning, the last thing she sees is Sonic swimming for her, still holding onto the bracelet pieces in her hand in the process. So eventually Amy wakes up back at the resort, finding out Tails saved her and Sonic with the tornado, and so Amy cries over losing the bracelet. Meanwhile, we cut over to Sonic, who is shown to be wearing Amy's bracelet all restored. As a kid, this episode emotionally destroyed me. I felt so bad for Amy in this episode. I remembered gasping and awing and sadness, with like when Sonic tried saving her despite knowing he could have drowned as well, and in that ending, it was just such a very unforgettable episode, and it made me a Sonic Amy fan for life, I'm not gonna lie. And I know it's kind of awkward, you get a bit older and you find out how old the actual characters' ages were, but hey, they're animals. Japan has different age restrictions, and Sega finally removed the ages of the Sonic characters. Apparently, I heard that now Sega doesn't even use like the character ages that they were given in Sonic Heroes or Sonic X. Instead, they say that they're ageless, so basically they leave it up to the fans to decide how old they are. So if you see Sonic and Amy as adults like I did as a kid, it's safe to say they're adults. But I think it's safe to say there are a few assumptions. So as long as you're not shipping young characters like Tails, Cream, and Charmy, I think fans should be okay. It's less creepy to see people still shipping Sonic and Amy compared to people trying to ship characters like Knuckles and Cream. That's just weird. But so, honestly, this episode in particular made me love Amy as a character, and it helps that I just found, like for the English dub at least, it helps that I found Lisa Ortiz to be one of Amy's best voice actresses. Much better than her voice from the Sonic Adventure game, at least. Although nowadays I do prefer her voice from Sonic Prime. I think that's the better Amy voice. But for a while, I honestly preferred Lisa Ortiz as the voice of Amy. And I just found Amy very relatable in this episode. And Amy's portrayal in Sonic X is very divisive amongst Sonic fans. Some fans loved her for her dreams and determination to get Sonic to notice and respect her. Others found her way too annoying, angry, bossy, and Sonic obsessed, and I gotta admit, there are times in the show where she went way too overboard, or the episodes just wrote her dirty. So, some episodes have her as the sweetest thing ever, like she was supposed to be in the adventure games. Others make her a complete brat. But for the most part, the show ended up taking one of the most hated characters, one of my most hated Sonic characters, and they actually made her one of my top 5 favorite Sonic characters. And this was the first episode to make me actually like Amy. And, yeah, overall, this was just one of my favorite episodes of Season 1. It's just such an emotionally heartbreaking episode, but still has a lot of sweet moments in the process. Another episode introduces Rouge the Bat into the mix while trying to make a fun origin story on how and why she was a government spy in Sonic Adventure 2, despite how she was a jewel thief. And so, when Rouge falls for a Chaos Emerald trap that the government set for Sonic, the government decide to use Rouge's skills to their advantage. They agree to drop Rouge's jewel theft charges if she works with them to take down Dr. Eggman. So Rouge decides to go along with it, although she really is trying to find a way to get the Chaos Emeralds from them behind their backs, although she never succeeds. So throughout the first 2 seasons of the series, we see Rouge being forced to tag along with a more serious human agent named Agent Topaz. And so from what I've seen, a lot of fans love these two. Like, they wish there was an entire TV show spin-off of them doing espionage and spy work. And yeah, I gotta admit, it could work. It would be a really funny action-packed series. But honestly, though, as a kid, I never cared for these two. I don't know why. I just thought they kind of bored me, or I found them kind of unpleasant to watch. But rewatching the show, especially the Japanese version, I definitely see more of the appeal between these two. And there is something funny about seeing these two bicker and bounce off each other, only to see them get serious and, make a great team when they really need to. So, while Rouge doesn't seem to care much for Topaz, it was nice to see Topaz actually warm up to Rouge in the end, to the point of crying when Rouge had to leave at the end of Season 2. So, Rouge definitely has some very funny scenes in the series, what with her fascination with gems and her flirty messing with Knuckles, but I do feel like Rouge is way too shallow of a character in Sonic X. It makes her seem kind of dim-witted, honestly, where other versions of her make her seem like a really cunning trickster kind of character, but Sonic X kind of portrayed her more as an idiot a lot of the times, because she's so shallow and too focused on gems that she's willing to let, like, the world get destroyed if it just means her getting her hands on a Chaos Emerald. And I hear many complain about how Rouge is handled in Sonic Prime, for example, but I honestly prefer how her various alter egos or dimensional forms were handled in Sonic Prime compared to how she is handled in Sonic X. And Rouge just came across as a very selfish villain a lot of times in Sonic X, and I liked her better when she was more of an anti-hero, actually helping the heroes out, and I liked her more as an ally than a villain, honestly. And not to mention how she just starts fights for no good reason a lot of times in the show, like her fight with Knuckles at the end of Season 2. I always thought, like, the 4Kids version of that scene, it was kind of confusing, but it honestly made more sense. It gave more of a reason for why she felt offended by what Knuckles said, which led to her causing a fight with it. In the Japanese version, I honestly had no idea why she started a fight to begin with. She just starts hurting the poor guy and leading them getting into a fight, and I honestly thought the 4Kids version made more sense. She was offended that Knuckles called her a jewel thief, and the Japanese version, I'm like, wait, what? What caused her to get so offended? I don't understand. So, yeah. So, other great episodes of Season 1 include the one where Eggman challenges the gang to a game of baseball. That's a really fun and funny episode. I especially loved it when Cheese was used as their secret weapon due to his short size being hard for Eggman's pitcher to pitch for, causing Cheese to, get nothing but balls to the point where he's given a free base. That was pretty funny. There's the episode where the gang is forced to go on a cruise to relax, and Sonic is going crazy from boredom and fear of being surrounded by nothing but water. Sonic was such a jerk in this episode, but it was so funny. He just plays and uses his friends, Tails and Amy. He just played them dirty by messing with their emotions and trying to get Chris and Co to cancel the trip and go back home. And especially got a laugh out of how he messed with Amy, faking that, like, he loves it when she swings her hammer around and causing Amy to start swinging her hammer around violently, trying to make everyone think that Amy went berserk as a desperate attempt to go home, but Then when Sonic overhears Amy telling Cream about how Sonic loves it when she swings her hammer, we see Sonic trying to sneak away and hide from Amy, eventually leading to Amy finding out, getting outraged, and then trying to knock him off of a crow's nest with her hammer. It's just a really funny episode, and the bit where Bo-kun cries because everyone's gone, Ella tries comforting him until he drops a bomb on her, leading her to hijack Tails' plane, the X-Tornado, and chasing Bo-kun, trying to ram him with the plane. It's just overall a very funny episode. I love this one. One episode has a president's aide wanting Sonic and Tails to come to a party with the president because he thinks the president shaking hands with Sonic will raise the president's popularity. So while Sonic's friends are very excited to go, Sonic refuses to go because he promised a girl in a wheelchair named Helen that he'd take her to an island to see some unique and pretty flowers. This is a very sweet episode, and Helen was a very empathetic character. She has a lot of excitement and energy, but is restricted from letting a lot of it out due to her handicap. And so she just wants to go and see these flowers that her parents promised to take her to see, but they never could because they're too busy paying off her medical expenses and food by, basically having to work their butts off at their job. So Sonic would rather keep his promise to this girl to just do something as simple as just take her to see flowers. He'd rather do that than go to a party that's being hosted by the president. And so Sonic would rather help this girl out than raise his ego by shaking hands with a fancy person like the president. So, unfortunately, the president's aide does not take lightly to Sonic's decline and forces agents to go after him and try to bring him back by force. Gotta love how Sonic X portrays the government as bad guys a lot of the time. It's so true. So, after watching this episode, one common question many fans have of Sonic X is, why is Chris the main kid character? Why not Helen? Helen was honestly a more interesting character. She just had more interesting passions, more interesting restrictions, and just a more interesting connection with Sonic. And it made you wish you saw more of her in the show. And she's a very minor reoccurring background character most of the time. So, yeah, it's kind of a shame. There was a lot of heart with Helen's character and her interactions with Sonic, and they honestly deserved more screen time. It would have been nice to see how Helen would have interacted with some of the other characters too, but unfortunately, Danny and Francis were more of the friend characters of Chris's that showed up more, and they were honestly very boring and forgettable background characters. So, yeah, I don't know. There's another beach episode in Season 1 where the gang try finding a Chaos Emerald that is located in the ocean, but they need to find a way to get Sonic down there without drowning. Kind of similar to what a Sonic Boom episode later did. The Sonic X version is still funny and stands out for certain scenes, like Sonic constantly being foiled by a pesky crab with all of his attempts of trying to get down to the ocean. And I remember getting a laugh out of that, and I still have that image of Tails and Cheese just chilling against a palm tree with sunglasses on their face. Like, I still have that image in the back of my head. I love it. And so there's the episode where Sonic and pals get taken by the ghosts from Sonic Adventure 2, and Amy ends up getting possessed by one of them. Apparently there are people to this day who are still traumatized by that episode. And another episode I really like is the one where Sonic gets a piece of Eggman's robot stuck in his ear, and it somehow causes Sonic to keep running uncontrollably without being able to stop. And Sonic and pals keep trying different plans to stop Sonic and help him out, but they keep getting foiled. And I still get a laugh out of the part where Sonic accidentally runs over Knuckles on a hamster wheel. And this episode also has some really cute Sonic and Amy moments at the beginning and end. So during the final two episodes, Knuckles talks Chris into working with Eggman to combine their Chaos Emeralds to return home, only for Eggman to trick and backstab Knuckles, take the emeralds for himself, and hold Chris hostage in his giant egg fortress. So Eggman uses the Chaos Emerald to transform his egg fortress into a giant fighting mech that nearly kills Sonic and drops him into the ocean. Chris manages to break free, he steals the Chaos Emeralds and ends up accidentally dropping them into the ocean as well, causing Sonic to get revived and turn into Super Sonic for the first time. As Super Sonic defeats Eggman's robot, Sonic is about to use the Emerald's powers to return everyone home, but Chris begs Sonic not to go because he's not ready to say goodbye. We see Knuckles return back home to Angel Island along with the Master Emerald that he's supposed to guard, but it ends with Sonic returning to Chris somehow, leaving fans to wonder what happened. So overall, Season 1 was an interesting, somewhat prequel to Sonic Adventure, and had some fun and funny moments, but a lot of filler in between. I remember as a kid, I found this Season 1 finale kind of sad, especially when Eggman's robot was beating up Sonic, and I honestly kind of prefer the 4Kids version of this finale since it didn't have any fourth wall break moments and it made Eggman look like he was intentionally trying to kill Sonic, where in the Japanese version, the Chaos Emeralds caused his robot to malfunction. He's trying to get it to stop before it kills Sonic, and it's like, wait, don't you want to defeat Sonic, so why are you upset if he gets killed? And that doesn't sound like the Eggman from the video games, and I don't know. So, I don't know, it just like, I kind of like the 4Kids dub better for treating it more seriously, I guess. The Japanese version was just a little too quirky.